The Light Beyond the Storm, a Nicklby Blackstone epilogue. Within a year of the war in Menzoberranzan and the banishment of the Demon Lords, Nicholas Blackstone returned to Silverymoon. He did not return as the disappointing son of a celebrated stage magician. He did not return as Nick, the young wizard who had left home to escape the shadow of his father's velvet coats, painted smiles and applause bought with tricks. He returned as Nicklby of the Perfect Tools, survivor of the Underdark, breaker of demons, and one of the most accomplished battle mages of his generation. The arcane invocorium welcomed him beneath its floating crystal observatory, where illusory stars turned slowly under the vaulted ceiling, and fragments of conjured moonlight drifted through the air like pale snow. Professors in silver-trimmed robes stood beside apprentices, still young enough to stare openly. War wizards from Silverymoon's garrison filled the rear galleries. Nobles came because they enjoyed ceremonies. Scholars came because they wanted to measure him. Students came because they had heard stories. At the centre of the hall stood Flamric Hydramist, headmaster and archmage. His eyes held the bright mischief for which he was famous, but beneath that brightness, Nicklby saw something older and harder. Flamric had known danger long before the younger professors had made a habit of discussing it from safe rooms. When Nicklby stood, Flamric placed the silver and blue mantle of professorship across his shoulders. "Professor Blackstone," the archmage said, his voice carrying with ease through the observatory. "You have studied magic in libraries, defended lives in darkness, and stood before powers that would have broken lesser minds. Let others debate what magic might be. You have demonstrated what magic must do." Nicklby accepted the mantle without flourish. He had never been comfortable with applause, even after all he had endured. A hall full of admiring wizards unsettled him more than an enemy battle line. There were too many eyes, too many expectations. Dickerson found him near the edge of the hall after the ceremony, smiling broadly with the easy warmth that could make even a room full of archmages seem like a tavern. Shay attended as well, luminous and dangerous in a way that made several professors keep a wise distance. They congratulated him. They spoke of old dangers and new duties. They laughed where they could. For one bright evening, Nicklby let himself be honoured. Then he went back to work. Though he taught in Silverymoon, he did not abandon the lands granted to him near Loudwater. On a rocky hill overlooking the Delimbir Vale, he raised a slender tower of pale stone and dark glass. Its upper chambers were layered with abjurations. Invisible walls of force shifted through the halls like silent guards. Sigils etched into the thresholds did not merely repel intruders. They studied them, measuring pace, breath, magical residue, and intent. The locals called it Blackstone Tower. Nicklby called it his laboratory. Above the main door to the upper chambers, Nicklby inscribed his first principle of instruction, a spell that has never faced resistance, has never been tested. Back in Silverymoon, students came from all throughout the kingdoms to study under the Wizard of the Perfect Tools. They expected lectures on the weave, and Nicklby gave them those. He could still speak for hours on structure, flow, sympathetic resonance, and the way an abjuration folded intention into geometry. But he also taught them to cast while blinded, wounded, surrounded, falling or afraid. He taught abjuration not as passive protection, but as the art of remaining standing when everything else had failed. He taught evocation as the disciplined projection of intent. He taught counterspelling as magical swordsmanship. He taught that preparation was not caution. Preparation was victory arranged in advance. His methods were controversial, almost from the beginning. The arcane invocorium had always taught practical magic, but it had done so with the careful self-regard of an institution that preferred theory to perspiration. Many professors believed that the highest use of magic was understanding. They collected spells, classified planar disturbances, debated metaphysical models, and produced papers that could stun a room into silence faster than any enchantment. Nicklby respected knowledge. He loved it in his way. Yet knowledge that refused to act had begun to irritate him. He had seen what happened when scholars waited for certainty. He had seen cities tremble while cautious men sought perfect understanding. His place on Flamric's war council only sharpened the divide. The council met beneath the Invocorium in a chamber surrounded by animated maps. Glowing markers tracked hostile armies, unstable portals, dragon movements, cult activity, and disturbances in the weave. When reports came in, most professors asked for more divinations, more inquiries, more time. Study the issue was always the first form of action. Nicklby listened until the conversation began circling itself. Then he would tap one finger against the map. "We know where the threat is." A diviner would protest that the enemy's precise intention remained uncertain. Nicklby would answer, "Intentions change after the first fireball." Several senior professors considered him dangerously aggressive. They believed the Invocorium existed to preserve knowledge, not to become a military institution. Flamric disagreed. He had read the reports from Menzoberranzan. He knew entire civilizations could perish, while committees debated the correct wording of a response. When the council hesitated, Flamric often turned to Nicklby. "What would you do, Professor Blackstone?" Nicklby would study the map. Then he would explain where enemy wards would fail, which bridge should be destroyed, where summoned creatures should be placed, which circles should be sealed, and precisely how many spells were required to end the conflict before dawn. Flamric almost always approved. That approval mattered more than Nicklby wished to admit. He admired Flamric. He needed someone in authority to understand that the world was not safe simply because scholars preferred it orderly. Then Seraphina Vale arrived at Blackstone Tower. She carried a letter bearing Flamric's seal and a request for consideration as Nickleby's personal apprentice. She was a young woman in her middle 20s, with dark auburn hair, intelligent amber eyes, and a thin scar along her left cheek. She possessed neither the nervousness nor the arrogance common among gifted young mages. Nicklby asked why she wished to study abjuration. "Because every wall exists to decide what may pass through it," she said. It was an unusual answer, honest perhaps, or rehearsed. It was difficult to tell. He accepted her. Seraphina proved exceptional. She mastered defensive spells quickly, but her true talent lay in understanding how protections could be inverted. She transformed wards into traps. She altered protective circles so that they crushed summoned creatures rather than merely excluding them. She devised a variation of counterspell that left a painful arcane resonance in the mind of the interrupted caster. She listened to Nickleby's lectures with an intensity few students possessed. After each lesson, she asked questions that struck sparks in him. Why contain an enemy when it could be destroyed? Why retreat behind a wall when the wall could advance? Why study magic unless one intended to impose that knowledge upon the world? Nickleby found himself looking forward to their conversations. She understood him. More than that, she seemed to understand what he had endured. She never pressed too hard when memories of the Underdark surfaced. She did not offer shallow comfort. She listened, and in the silence that followed his recollections, she gave him the dignity of not looking away. When other professors complained about the increasingly martial character of his curriculum, Seraphina reminded him that those same professors slept safely because wizards like Nicklby faced what they only studied. She would say, "We act where others just ponder, philosophize, and endlessly argue." It was then that he realized he loved her. With Flamrick's approval, Nicklby formalized his methods into a new course structure, the doctrine of applied will. It taught that magic was not merely contemplation. It was the means by which a trained mind imposed order upon danger. Students learned battlefield positioning, siege magic, counter-rituals, magical dueling, and the coordinated use of spellcasters alongside soldiers. Enrollment tripled within 2 years. Graduates of the program became prized across the north. Some served in the forces of Silvery Moon and Waterdeep. Others protected roads, hunted monsters, broke enemy enchantments, or commanded companies of war wizards. Traditionalists protested that Nicklby was transforming students into weapons. Nicklby did not deny it. A weapon is merely a tool capable of changing an outcome, he told the faculty. The question is not whether our students possess power. The question is whether they possess the will to use it when the moment comes. Flamrick publicly defended him. The protests faded, the doctrine spread, but something else spread with it. Nicklby's lectures sharpened. His examinations grew harsher. Students were no longer asked merely to explain spells. They had to demonstrate how spells could dominate a battlefield. At the start of each year, Nicklby addressed the new apprentices in the Tower Arena. Magic is not decoration, he told them. It is not a parlor trick. It is not an excuse to spend your life watching dust gather on a shelf. Magic is thought made sovereign. It is the force of your will given shape. Learn it carefully, use it decisively. When evil stands before you, do not bore it with theory. The students adored him. The other professors feared what he was creating. Seraphina became his assistant, then his colleague, then far more. She moved beside him through the invocorium with quiet grace, always a half step from the center of attention, and somehow never outside its influence. Gossip followed her. Some said she avoided consecrated chambers without seeming to do so. Others swore her reflection smiled a heartbeat after she did. One apprentice claimed her eyes flared red when anger crossed her face. Nicklby never saw it. She came to the chapel when required. Her reflection enchanted him. She was never angry in ways that mattered. Everyone had secrets. He had his. Mystery, he told himself, was part of love. Nicklby married Seraphina Vale in 1382 in the upper observatory of Blackstone Keep, near Loudwater. She remained as graceful, enchanting and beautiful as when she first arrived in the reign. Their son, Lucian Blackstone, was born in 1383 during a summer storm. There were many storms in the north, so Nicklby refused to read omen into it. The servants did not agree. Valerian rarely cried. He learned things the first time they were taught. He watched people with unsettling focus. By 6, he could identify magical auras. By 10, he could maintain a ward in his sleep. By 14, he defeated 3 senior apprentices in a sanctioned duel without taking injury. 5 years after the ceremony that made him professor, Nicklby stood before a vast assembly within the invocorium. Hundreds of young wizards filled the hall. Behind him sat Flamrick and the War Council. Seraphina watched from the front row. Nicklby raised one hand, and illusion bloomed above the audience. Menzoberranzan, burning beneath the shadows of demon lords. The students stared upward in silence. These creatures were not defeated by observation, Nicklby said. They were not banished by debate. They were defeated because a small number of people chose to act, while others believed the task impossible. The image shifted to 7 figures standing together amid smoke and fire. The weave does not care whether you are brave. Your enemies do not care whether you are prepared. When the moment comes, only what you do will matter. He closed his hand. the illusion vanished. From her seat, Seraphina smiled. Far below the Invocorium, beneath wards that had stood since Silvery Moon's founding, a ruby-red spark appeared in a sealed stone beneath Seraphina's private chambers. It burned without heat. It required no summoning circle. No bargain had been spoken. No soul surrendered. A door had merely been taught that it ought to open. And somewhere beyond the mortal world, upon a throne of law, flame, and exquisite patience, Asmodeus listened as hundreds of young wizards repeated Professor Blackstone's final lesson. Knowledge is power. Focus is strength. Magic, applied with will, is victory. Victory creates order. Order is peace. Many years passed. For most mortals, 4 decades announced themselves without mercy. Shoulders bent, hands trembled. Faces became maps of decisions made and regrets endured. While Nicklby used magics to age slower, he was not untouched. Greying hair, fine lines around the eyes, aches that nag the body. Flamric Hydramist had not aged at all. The Archmage remained exactly as Nicklby remembered him from those first years. Sharp-eyed, vigorous, unpredictable, and untouched by time. Nicklby never asked how. Powerful wizards were permitted their secrets. Yet Flamric's unchanged face became increasingly difficult for him to look upon. It proved that immortality, or something near it, might be possible without corruption. Over time, the doctrine of applied will had become the Blackstone School of Strategic Arcana. Its graduates were known throughout the North as Blackstone War Mages. They wore grey coats, carried iron staves, and fought not as solitary spellcasters, but as disciplined companies. They could shield a village, break a siege, collapse a portal, or destroy a cult before dawn. Their earliest campaigns were unquestioned acts of heroism. They sealed abyssal breaches beneath the Evermoors. They destroyed a cult of Baphomet in a mountain fortress. They purged a shadow demon from a village near the high forest. They hunted fiends through ruins, swamps, frozen passes, and forgotten temples. Their grey coats became symbols of safety. Then the definition of danger broadened. A demon did not need to be present. Its influence was sufficient. A merchant carrying an abyssal relic might be a cultist. A scholar studying forbidden lore might be compromised. A noble whose ancestor had made a fiendish bargain might carry corruption in the blood. A village refusing inspection might be concealing something. The war mages began holding tribunals. Then they conducted occupations. Then they imposed laws, their laws, magical laws, without permission from the rulers beneath whose banners they marched. Each step was explained as necessary. Each restriction was temporary. Each conquest was undertaken for the protection of those being conquered. The Lord's Alliance became alarmed. Silvery Moon became afraid. To Nicklby, she was his greatest confidant. To the war mages, she was the quiet mind behind the master. Seraphina never ordered him to become harsher. She merely counselled him, so that harshness appeared to be the only responsible choice. When he wondered whether the school had gone too far, she said, "Those protected by strength frequently resent the hand holding the shield." When officials accused him of conquest, she answered, "Law without enforcement is only a request." When civilians feared the war mages, she said, "Fear often precedes obedience. Obedience precedes peace." Valerian grew into a gifted abjurer, a brilliant battlefield commander, and a merciless judge of those he believed corrupted. He did not enjoy cruelty. That made him more disturbing. Cruelty to him was a tool. If it worked, he used it. If another method worked better, he used that instead. During one campaign, Valerian detained hundreds of villagers to uncover 12 demon cultists hiding among them. When questioned about the innocent captives, he said, "They survived. The cult did not. The result justifies the method." Nicklby recognized the logic. It was his own teaching, refined and stripped of hesitation. The breaking point came at Nesme. Blackstone war mages entered the city without authorization after reports of demonic rites near the old walls. They uncovered a real cult. They destroyed it with fire. Then they refused to leave. Valerian argued that local rulers had proven incapable of defending their people. The war mages suspended civic authority, rewrote several laws, and began prosecuting anyone they considered sympathetic to disorder. The Lord's Alliance demanded withdrawal. The High Lady of Silvery Moon ordered Nicklby to recall his forces. He delayed. Flamric confronted him before the War Council. The same animated maps that had once confirmed Nicklby's brilliance now glowed cold between them. "You taught us to act," Nicklby said. "I taught you to act against evil," Flamric answered. "Not to declare yourself the measure of it. Someone must decide." "Yes," Flamric's eyes hardened. "But it cannot be you." The council voted to dissolve the Blackstone School. Nicklby refused to dissolve it, but he chose to depart. Almost all his war mages followed him into exile. Their refuge lay far from the north, in the Black Mountains of Anarok, where storms gathered without season and lightning walked the ridges like a living thing. The fortress was called the Sanctum of the Crowned Storm. It had been carved into an ancient mountain and protected by cliffs, airbound creatures and wards older than several kingdoms. Its master was Limrith, the Sapphire Tyrant, an ancient blue dragon of immense power. Limrith was no mindless beast. He was a ruler, philosopher, collector, and strategist. For years he had corresponded with Nicklby through intermediaries, sending obscure lore, fragments of Netherese theory, and polite observations on the weakness of human governments. He admired disciplined magic. He respected efficiency. He found Nicklby's exile useful. The dragon gave the war mages laboratories, libraries, soldiers, and territory. In return, they became instruments of stability throughout his domain. Demon cults vanished. Bandit kingdoms collapsed. Roads became safe. Taxes were collected, without exception. Rebellions ended quickly. The people beneath the crowned storm knew peace. They also knew resistance brought war mages to their doors. Nicklby told himself the alliance was temporary and that the intrusions were necessary. Valerian called it the beginning of a better civilization. He directed interrogations personally, and his judgment was obeyed without question. Seraphina said only, "Small people need a steady hand that can protect them." Years passed within the storm. Then Dickerson arrived at the gates. He came without an army, without an escort, and without permission. The guards found him standing in the rain with a travel-stained cloak drawn around his shoulders, one hand resting near an old sword and the other holding a battered instrument case. Age had touched him honestly. His hair was grey. His face was lined. His stride was slower than in the days of the perfect tools. Yet his eyes remained bright, and his voice still carried the warmth that had filled taverns, throne rooms, battlefields, and impossible places across the plains. When the gate captain demanded his name, Dickerson smiled. Tullyworth Vance Dickerson. The captain did not recognize it. Dickerson sighed. "Just tell Nicklby a friend has come, hopefully a welcome one." Nicklby received him in the Hall of Storms. Limrith's enormous blue form rested upon a raised platform between pillars of black stone. Seraphina stood beside Nicklby, composed and beautiful, in crimson and dark gold. Valerian watched from the edge of the chamber, his anger hidden only by discipline. Dickerson entered alone. For several moments neither old companion spoke. Then Dickerson looked around the fortress. "Well," he said, "you always did prefer practical accommodations." Nicklby almost smiled. "You have travelled far." "So have you." Dickerson looked toward the dragon. Limrith inclined his horned head. "Bard, paladin, storyteller, your reputation preceded you." "Usually does," Dickerson replied. "Not always accurately." The dragon's eyes narrowed with amusement. Dickerson turned back to Nicklby. "I came because Flamric would not." Nickleby's expression hardened. "He sent you." "No, he told me not to come." Dickerson looked around again. "Now I can see why." That answer seemed to surprise everyone except the dragon. "He believes you made your choice," Dickerson continued. "He thinks confronting you would become a contest of power, and neither of you would back down." "He is correct." "Probably, but I do not contend on power." Dickerson stepped closer. "I remember when we were all in chains, Nicklby. I remember the filth, the Underdark, and the drow whips. I remember the slave pen. I remember every creature we fought because it believed power gave it the right to rule anyone weaker." The chamber grew still. Nickleby's voice cooled. "You compare me to drow slavers. I compare your reasons to theirs." Valerian stepped forward, his staff flaring with fire. "You stand in my father's fortress and insult him." Dickerson glanced at him. "No, I stand in a dragon's fortress and remind your father that it is not his." Limrith looked amused, but did not contest the point. Nicklby raised a hand before Valerian could speak again. "You have seen none of what we built here." "I have seen enough, H. You have seen safe roads, cities without demon cults, towns protected from raiders. I have also seen gallows for cultists, prisons for associates of cultists, occupied towns for their protection." Dickerson's expression became sorrowful. "Listen to yourself." Nickleby's wards stirred, forming faint layers of silver light around his shoulders. Dickerson did not reach for his weapon. "That is what they always say. Every tyrant we ever fought believed the cruelty was temporary. Every devil called the contract necessary. Every drow called terror strength. Fear is their weapon, Nicklby, and the promise of security is how you slip that weapon into people's hands. We are nothing like them. You hunt demons. Yes. You hunt those influenced by demons. Yes. And those who might be influenced." Nicklby did not answer. Dickerson stepped closer. "Now you punish people for what they might become." Seraphina spoke softly. "Would you prefer that we wait for villages to burn?" Dickerson looked at her for a long moment. "No." Something in his gaze changed. "But I have met your master's servants before." The air went cold. "My master sits here," Seraphina said. "Archmage Nicklby." Valerian's hand tightened on his staff. Nicklby stirred. Limrith watched with interest. Dickerson turned again to Nicklby. "Asmodeus has tainted your vision." Nickleby's expression darkened. "You accuse my wife?" "I accuse the Lord of Nessus. His gifts came with a cost to all of us. Some costs were obvious, others were subtle. I worship no one." "Someone does," Dickerson said, "whether they acknowledge it or not." Red light flickered briefly through the war mage's warding runes. Dickerson pointed toward it. "There, do you see?" Nicklby looked. For years he had seen angular circles, binding chains, crimson brands, and rigid geometry in the school's magic. He had called them refinements. Now, in Dickerson's presence, they looked infernal. Dickerson removed one glove. Around his wrist hung a golden chain, and the old cross Blake had given him when he became a paladin, a worn symbol of Istar polished by years of travel. Blake believed in Istar before most of us understood what that meant, Dickerson said. He believed there was a light worth building toward. Not the light of obedience, not the light of conquest. A light that showed people the path and still allowed them to choose whether to walk it. Choice permits evil. Yes, Dickerson said. It also permits goodness. Nicklby shook his head. You speak like a bard. I am a bard, and a bard who stood beside you in the darkest times. We know what is out there, the chaos that devours, the evil that manipulates. Power stops power, yes, but power without conscience becomes the next monster. The old name hung between them, the perfect tools. We called ourselves that because someone else had put us in chains, Dickerson said. It was a joke, a refusal to become what they wanted us to be. Now you have made tools of thousands. Nickleby's wards flickered, not broken, uncertain. Dickerson placed a hand on his old friend's shoulder. We fought, so people would not have to live under creatures who believed power made them righteous. We fought against vile rituals and tyrants, and now you stand beside both. Nicklby put his hand over Dickerson's and, for the first time that day, smiled with genuine affection. Come with me, my old friend. He led Dickerson below the fortress. Seraphina followed. So did Limrith, for every hall had been built wide enough for the dragon. Valerian was ordered to remain behind, though anger burned in his eyes. They descended to the lowest vault, where books on necromancy, preservation, soul transfer and undeath lay open beneath cold blue lamps. At the centre of the chamber rested a small golden vessel, elegant and unfinished. Dickerson stared at it for a long while. Lichdom. Continuity, Nicklby replied. Everlasting life. No, lichdom, eternal death. Demons are immortal. So are ideas. My school will not survive without me. The admission hung raw between them. Then you built it badly, Dickerson said. There was no malice in it, only sorrow. Cults die when the leader dies. Institutions with righteous purpose can last 1,000 years. Nicklby flinched as if struck. Dickerson moved closer to the vessel. What must you feed it? Nicklby said nothing. That silence is the answer. Seraphina's voice remained calm. Death comes for every mortal achievement. He seeks only to preserve what he has built. Dickerson turned to her. And what has he built? A world capable of resisting chaos. No, Dickerson said. He built a wall and became so afraid of what lay beyond it that he forgot whom the wall was meant to protect. Limrith lowered his massive head toward the golden vessel. I have never favoured undeath, the dragon said. Nicklby looked up sharply. A Dracolich is powerful, Limrith continued, but diminished. Breath without warmth, dominion without appetite, treasure without pleasure in possession. Dickerson nodded, unexpectedly sensible. Limrith ignored him. I offered you sanctuary, Nicholas Blackstone, because you are useful while alive. Your mind remains adaptive. Your restraint, though eroded, still exists. Villagers concern me little. Your work interests me greatly. Nicklby asked, Then you oppose the ritual? I oppose crude solutions, Limrith said. His claws scraped softly against stone. There are other, older paths, ways of extending life without surrendering the soul to a vessel, ways of allowing flesh to renew, ways of binding years to places, bloodlines, storms, or promises. Nicklby stared at him. At what cost? The dragon smiled. all enduring things have a cost. Humans are not equipped to pass the time of centuries. Fortunately, I and others are here to help. His gaze moved briefly towards Seraphina. "What is the cost?" Nicklby asked again. Limrith did not answer. That silence troubled Dickerson more than any threat could have. When they returned to the Hall of Storms, Valerian waited. "What has been decided?" he demanded. "Nothing," Nicklby said. "Then the bard has wasted our time." Dickerson studied the young mage. "You are very much your father's son." Valerian took it as praise. Dickerson had not intended it that way. "The school requires permanence," Valerian said. "Through father, through me, or through another means. The school requires a conscience. Conscience creates hesitation. Good, patience, introspection, mercy, they are messy things, like composing a song." Valerian's eyes narrowed. "Hesitation gets people killed. So does certainty." Nicklby watched them, and for the first time saw not merely a gifted heir, but the final expression of his doctrine. Valerian possessed all of Nicklby's conviction and none of his doubt. Seraphina had called that strength. Dickerson had named it tyranny. Nicklby could no longer pretend not to understand the difference. That evening, Dickerson performed in the Hall of Storms. No one requested it. He simply opened his battered case, withdrew his mandolin, and began to play. The melody was one Nicklby remembered from their travels. It had been sung in dark tunnels, beside dying fires, and after battles none of them expected to survive. It was not a hymn of conquest. It was a song of companions who walked into shadow together and found, beyond fear, a light that waited for them to turn back toward it. War mages gathered in silence. Some removed their helms, some bowed their heads, some wept. Valerian left before the song ended. Seraphina remained, smiling faintly. Limrith listened with his eyes closed. Nicklby stood beneath the great pillars and remembered Blake speaking of Istar. He remembered Flamrick's warning. He remembered being a scholar who wanted to understand magic rather than dominate through it. He remembered the slave pen and the helplessness that had hollowed him out. Perhaps everything had begun there. Perhaps all his walls, armies, laws and bindings had been attempts to ensure he would never be helpless again. When the song ended, no one applauded. The silence was too sacred for that. Limrith finally opened his eyes. "Bard," he said softly, "for a dragon, you will always be welcome in my halls." At dawn, Dickerson prepared to leave. Nicklby met him at the outer gate. The storm had weakened, and pale sunlight broke between distant clouds. "You could stay," Nicklby said. Dickerson smiled. "That would rather undermine the point." "You believe I can still change?" Dickerson embraced him. "I would not have come otherwise." Nicklby looked toward the mountains. "Valerian will resist." "Yes, children of the perfect tools inherited the best and worst we had to offer. They have not seen what we saw. They did not endure what we endured, but they inherit the fallout. Seraphina will not understand." Dickerson studied him. "She understands more than you think. Be wary. Her goals may not be your own." Nickleby's expression tightened. "And the dragon?" "The dragon is a dragon. I like him in a troubling way. He speaks truth, but always in service to his own purposes. That can help you, but it can also bind you." Dickerson pulled his cloak around himself. "Never mistake a more elegant chain for freedom." Nicklby nodded slowly. Dickerson began walking down the descending road. After several steps, he turned. "Istar is still there, Nicklby. I have never worshipped Istar. You do not have to. If you have doubts, call me. I will be there, even if I am gone. I swear it, my friend. Dickerson smiled. Just remember there is a light more worthy than the one burning in hell. Then he departed. That night Nicklby returned to the laboratory. The golden vessel waited on the stone table. Beside it lay the notes Limrith had provided. They did not describe lichdom. They described something older, stranger, perhaps wholly in a way alien to mortal faith. Fragments of draconic rites, storms that remembered names, bloodlines that carried portions of a soul, sanctums capable of lending years to a chosen master. The method was incomplete. Its price was unstated. Its true purpose remained uncertain. Seraphina appeared in the doorway. "Will you destroy the phylactery?" she asked. Nicklby looked at the vessel. "I do not know. It requires more study." "Dickerson has filled you with doubt?" "No." Nicklby turned toward her. "He reminded me of things I had forgotten. He reminded me of something I once possessed." For the first time, something cold moved behind Seraphina's eyes. Only for a moment. Then she smiled. "Wisdom, then." "Not certainty," Nicklby said. "And for once that is comforting." He placed his hand over the golden vessel. Red light flickered beneath his fingers. The prepared necromantic magic unravelled in a flash, vanishing like a spark swallowed by morning. He thought of Asmodeus. He thought of Istar. He thought of his son. He thought of the dragon's vague promise and the question it refused to answer. Beyond the narrow window high above the chamber, the storm began to break. A thin beam of morning light entered the fortress and fell across the table. The last red glow faded beneath it. Nicklby did not destroy the vessel. He did not complete it. Instead, he closed the necromantic books, placed them and the phylactery inside his personal vault, and shut the door. Wards appeared. He spoke words of power that sealed them. For the first time in many years, the master of the Blackstone War Mages answered one question and left another unanswered. Far down the mountain road, Dickerson heard thunder behind him. He did not turn around. He only smiled and continued toward the rising light.